So again, a lot of people have an interesting concept of racism. Racism is also a word that everybody gets all twisted about. And I teach a course, like I said, to graduate students on post-traumatic slave syndrome. Now let me explain something. I don't do race relations 101. I don't have time. Now I understand that there may even be people in this room that went, this is an interesting event. I'm going to go to that and support it. Yes, I am. And I'm going to sit and learn, but they have no idea that what they're getting ready to get here. And they may even stop and think to themselves, is it really that bad still? You think? Maybe you people are just overreacting and you may be a little too sensitive. I don't work with them. You can stay in the room, but this is a 600 level course. And people of color that walked into this room walked in at the 600 level, having lived in their skin. So I'm not dealing with the person who's going, do you think? I don't have time. Because there's too many people hemorrhaging for me to even begin to do that. So before I even teach my course, I send, and let me introduce my daughter who's in the audience, Joy's daughter here is Bahia Overton. Could you please stand, Bahia? Yes. She's a ABD, working on her PhD. Very proud of her. Anyway, she's one of my graduate assistants. And before I actually teach my course on post-traumatic, I have my daughter go in and introduce this concept first, just so we can weed out the 101s. Because I'm not going to, the tears, whatever, I can't, no, can't do it, won't do it, okay? So what ends up happening is I give them the example, I ask them what they understand about race. Now we can see it kind of rolls off the tongue. Racism is a system of advantage based on race. Can you see this well though, by the way? Can you see this? Okay, good. So it's a system of advantage based on race. Rolls off the tongue, pretty straightforward. But people think everybody's on the same page about that. I have never been in an audience where people really get that. Ever, no matter how well educated folks are. So, have her ask a fundamental question. Do you think people in this audience, do you think you have a grasp on, well, let me just say, do you believe that there's something called white racism, or white racism? Show of hands. White racism. Now, I want y'all all turn around. Don't be afeared, there's not gonna be no test at the end. How many people believe there is something called white racism? Show of hands. Now look around the room so everybody can see, and you got folks kind of going. Okay, all right, another question. How many people in the room believe there's something called black racism? Show of hands. Okay, look around the room. I want y'all to look around. Okay, so now we're going to, see what I'm saying? We having fun. I mean, what the heck? Wait, is this a trick? What's she doing? Okay, so, not a trick. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so the first column, we're going to talk about white racism because you're going to define it and assess this for yourself. This is why I have my daughter go in. So, white racism, we're going to define that first. I need for you to tell me how white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people as an entire group of people. I'm going to say that again. How is it that white racism adversely impacts the lives of black people in America as an entire group? In what ways? Tell me. Wealth. Economics. Healthcare. Education. Privilege, criminal justice. Okay, you're kind of getting it? Okay, good. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, and we can go on. We're going to talk about black racism. I need you to tell me, listen carefully, how black racism adversely impacts the lives of white people in America as an entire group of people. You see the difference? You've answered your question. There's something called black people hating. They can call you names. I hate you, hate you, hate you. I hate, jump up and, matter of fact, let's get all 12% of the black folk. I think they say there's 13% of us now. Let's get all 13% of us hating white people. You still get the loan. You still get the house. You still get, are you following me? So you might have black people that hate white people. You may have black people that maybe affect a white person. But racism not only implies I don't like it, but I have the power to impact you as an entire group. That's the difference. Now at this point, I have folks going, what is she trying to say? I'm just telling you what it is. It's not personal, but it is true, okay? So we have to get, and usually by the next class, we know who's gonna stay in the class. See what I'm saying? So the very first fundamental contradiction that occurred was the Constitution itself, was a whole notion of freedom and democracy that at the same time coexisted with the genocide of Native Americans, people, Indian people, and the enslavement of African people. I mean, there seems to be a glaring contradiction going on there. So it created cognitive. So we have to remove the dissonance, and we do so. I have it right there. You have to justify your behavior by relabeling the people to fit your behavior toward them, because we can't have people feeling uncomfortable about this. We have to have everyone be okay about it. So somehow we have to make the notion of slavery reasonable and justified. And here are the institutions that were complicit, that had to be a part of, to participate in removing the dissonance. Are you hearing me? This was very, 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 very clear. And what I'm going to share with you is neither obscure or particularly provocative. It's just been left out. What I'm going to share with you is not, something we don't know. It just got taken out of the books. Because if it were left in the books, little Timmy and them would be feeling a little uncomfortable. Okay, let's start here. How many of you knew that the United States recently apologized for slavery? Did you know that? Interesting. That's a pretty major event, but you didn't hear much about it. Where was, the big, CNN, commemorations, day of, nothing. And then I wondered, they apologized twice, 2008 and 2009. House of Representatives, right, and the Senate. Both apologized too. And I thought, why 2008? Did they just remember? I mean, didn't they know? And the interesting thing about this is because in 2007, I was touring Europe because I do work in London. And they were celebrating the 200th anniversary of the end of the slave trade in England. Entire country, Google it. Entire country was commemorating the end of the slave trade in Europe in 2007. What was the bicentenary or the 200th anniversary in America? That would be 2008. We had to do something. But look at what it says, all you whining and complaining black people. It acknowledged the injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery and Jim Crow. The resolution states that the vestiges of Jim Crow continue to this day. African Americans continue to suffer from the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow long after both systems were formally abolished through enormous damage and loss, both tangible and intangible, including the loss of human dignity and liberty, the frustration of careers and professional lives, and the long-term loss of income and opportunity. They knew and have always known. But whenever anyone black mentions it, oh, come on, you're free now. The playing field's been leveled for you people. And so even black people shudder when you say the word slave, because they don't want to be appearing like, the whiners. We also know that there's a crime based on the International Tribunal. It's a crime against humanity, punishable by death. Interesting. Slavery is listed. But somehow America escaped that. So let's look at the role of these various components. This is Carl von Linnaeus. Now I just want to say, it's just my personal opinion, you should always get concerned when you see folks dressed like this. Just something that I don't. Now actually all of you know Carl. Anyone that went to high school, you had to deal with Carl. Carl von Linnaeus developed a taxonomic system based on a criterion of skin color and laid the basis for 19th century racial classification. He's basically known for classifying stuff, phylum, genus, species. He just classified everything. He also classified human beings. Note the date, 1707 to 1778. Now, what is going on in America at that time is American chattel slavery. Now, let's just get up close and personal with that, because there's some people, these are the other folks that are going, well, you know, slavery's not a new institution. Slavery's always existed, and all societies have had some form of slavery. But there is nothing like American chattel slavery. Because you see, in the past, most people who became slaves became so as a result of war. Two societies went to war, winners enslaved the losers. Sometimes you would have, in a case like Rome, you'd have a more dominant, country or place, or, make war and take the manpower. But Europeans systematically turned the capturing, shipping, and selling of other human beings into a business. A business that would develop into the backbone of an entire economy. That's different. It differed in the manner in which a person became enslaved. It differed in the length of servitude. It differed in the treatment of enslaved people. And it differed, listen carefully, most of all, the way that they were viewed, which were subhuman, which means you will never rise to the level of human, which means that you will forever be a slave. Well, let's see how we justify this to remove the cognitive. Now, science becomes important because, whenever people want to, prove their point, they go, it's scientific what I'm talking about. This is a scientific fact, okay? Which means that it trumps whatever fact you have because it's a scientific fact. Anybody notice we lost a planet recently? Now, some people are old enough to remember the little styrofoam balls that we used to use with the little planets, one of them's gone. I'm mad about that. That one of the little balls gone. And see, that's a whole damn it planet. Let's keep it real. How you lose a planet? That's a big mistake, you think? But, you notice how it just kind of went on without a ripple. They just ripped the ball off and kept it moving. And science never said anything about it except we've had a paradigm shift. Here's the answer. You was wrong. That was what that was. Wasn't never a planet there. Anyway, I digress. Although color classifications of races dated back to the ancient Egyptians, anthropologists refer to Linnaeus' taxonomy, now he's the father of anthropology here, of 1735 as the first modern study of man. And while Linnaeus advanced classification with his use of a color criterion, he also fixed on his four families of man certain moral and intellectual peculiarities. That continued into the 19th century anthropological vocabulary. He described Homo americanus. Who might that be? That would be natives. And let's see what he says about them. He says they are reddish, choleric, obstinate, contented, and regulated by customs. No science yet. Homo europaeus, that would be white people. He says they are white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by laws. Still no science. Homo asiaticus, that would be Asians. He says they are sallow, grave, dignified, avaricious, and ruled by opinions. And Homo affer, black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. These insights into what Linnaeus defined as racial character, personality traits, behavior, intelligence, language, and a host of other related categories were transmitted into subsequent attempts at a science of classification and became more fixed than the races themselves. Not a shred of science here. But it is in a book. And presumably if it's in a book, then it must be true. And look at how he's dressed. So here's the thing. There's only one group that really receives scathing attributions. All of them. All of them are scathing. So now remember, let's see if you're paying attention. In order to remove the dissonance, what must you do? You have to justify your behavior. How do you do so? By relabeling the people to fit your behavior towards them. Don't they deserve to be enslaved? I just told you that they're phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. Don't they deserve to be slaved? And I've told you this is scientifically what they are. And then my students in 2011 say, well, Dr. Joy, wait, we're talking 1707. I said, but do you not still hear these attributions? Do you not still hear them today? So much so that my mother, bless her heart, passed away. The dad died far too soon as well. But my mother taught me in such a way that it wasn't until recently that I was able to leave a hotel room dirty enough for any maid to have to clean it. Because my mother taught me, always leave it cleaner than you found it. Because my mother was running from the shame, you see. My mother was running from what will they think about us, the black people, if we leave the room dirty. Are you hearing me? So let's look at his Vita. Apparently no one else did. Linnaeus, the formal education of this great Swedish scientist, after 1 week received his PhD for a 13-page dissertation from the Dutch University of Harderwijk, which one historian of science designated as a mail-order institution. The University of Harderwijk was known for selling degrees. A saying in the Netherlands for a person whose scientific knowledge is questionable is, he's from the University of Harderwijk. Okay, now this is Johann. Look at him. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach, he becomes another very important person. He was a professor at Göttingen that designated 5 races or varieties of man in the second edition of his work on the natural variety of mankind. His division into Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Ethiopian, and Malayan races, with the added Carl von Linnaeus descriptive peculiarities, became the subsequent basis of most 19th century anthropomedical studies. While Linnaeus founded his system, remember, principally upon skin color, Blumenbach considered a combination of color, hair, skull, and facial characteristics as fundamental means for classifying what he believed to be the 5 varieties of man. Central to his study was the term Caucasian, which he originated. He took the name Caucasian, listen for the science, from Mount Caucasus because its southern slope had cradled what he felt to be the most beautiful race of men. The Georgian, the Caucasus near Mount Ararat, upon which the biblical ark came to rest after the flood, seemed the appropriate source for the original race of man. Now I'm quoting him here, and he says, and I quote, "For in the first place, the stock displays, as we've seen, the most beautiful form of the skull, from which as a mean and primeval type the others diverge by most easy gradations on both sides to the 2 ultimate extremes, that is, on the one side the Mongolian and on the other the Ethiopian. Besides, it is white in color." Anybody out there ever met a skull that wasn't? Alrighty then. Which we may fairly assume to have been the primitive color of mankind. Zippity-doo-dah, no science here. Let's look at his education. This might explain it. Blumenbach received his medical degree from the University at Göttingen after submitting his 15-page long dissertation, the result of 1 year's study with an older professor who owned an extraordinarily large and disordered natural history collection. Blumenbach, along with scientific races of Britain and the United States, began to rank facial characteristics and skin color hierarchically, beginning, not surprisingly, with white as superior and most beautiful, thus identifying beauty as a scientific category. What we have to understand here, and I'm not going to read this, I highly recommend that you read this book, though, which is called The History of White People by Nell Painter. The whole notion of whiteness did not exist in antiquity. Nobody referred to themselves as white in antiquity. Whiteness is a new phenomenon, because there was a point when Irish weren't white. You know that, right? Irish was right along there with all the rest of the subhumans until the invention of white supremacy and the concept of whiteness, which came much later. It has nothing to do with the history of white people as it relates to antiquity. So here's what we now know, because we have, CSI. Based on mitochondrial DNA, we now know that race is a concept of society that insists there is a genetic significance behind human variations in skin color that transcend outward appearance. However, race has no scientific merit outside of sociological classifications. There are no significant genetic variations within the human species to justify the division of races. Mankind is one. And we have always been one. Which begs the question of why the bell curve came up yet again. It begs the question why we consistently deal with notions of inferiority and superiority. Because we're trying to remove the cognitive dissonance. Okay, so let's see what politics said. Okay, well, again, look how he's dressed. So here's what we realize. This is James Madison. Now, this becomes critical because of who he is, right? Now, we know about the Three-Fifths Compromise. How many of you know about that? Three-Fifths Compromise. Okay, well, we don't have to go over that. We know that it was all political. It was about power and money. And we know that the South wanted to keep slavery at the Constitutional Convention of 1787. They wanted to, or 1778, they wanted to maintain slavery. The South, the North wanted to abolish it. Everyone agreed to abolish it. Everyone did except one state, South Carolina. So they stalemated, decided to table the discussion. Slavery continued to be legal. Well, how are we going to count the slaves? Because you know the more people residing in a state, the more representatives you can send to the House of Representatives and the more power. So, of course, Southerners wanted to count the slaves. Northerners says you can't count the slaves, you say they're not human. Agreed upon solution, Three-Fifths Compromise. Rather than each slave being counted, 3/5 of the entire population. Hence, we became divested of 2/5 of the man. But you don't even know you're talking about a human being here. Look at how it rolls off the tongue. Blacks are inhabitants, but is debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave as divested of 2/5. Are we talking about him? Is there a warm body in there somewhere? No, but we had to remove the what? So language also helped us to, okay, and so then we have my favorite person, Thomas Jefferson. You know, you all remember the big, scandal. Folks started clutching the pearls. Oh my God, not Thomas, not our Thomas. Yeah. See, everybody black knew about Sally Hemings already. We all knew. As a matter of fact, I have some cousins in Louisiana. We call him our, matter of fact, it's an anchor, don't tell him. His name is Pierre DeGroux. He's my cousin, but we never get invited to the family gatherings because Pierre doesn't know about us, but we know about him. And so there's this whole notion of, the mixing and people, concerned. But let's look at what Thomas Jefferson, he becomes an important person too, right? Because if he said it, that's Thomas Jefferson. It must be what? True! Thomas Jefferson wouldn't lie to us. He's the father of our country. He really is the father of our country. Okay. So I'm just saying, So let's see what he said. He said blacks smelled bad and were physically unattractive. A little inconsistent with his behavior, isn't it? Now here's one that was even more interesting. He said we required less sleep. See, that's an interesting one there. Because you see, what he's trying to remove is his own cognitive dissonance, yes? And in so doing, he removes everyone else's dissonance because, well, he's Thomas Jefferson. So he said we required less sleep. What dissonance was he experiencing that he would need to say that? How long was the workday for an enslaved African? Anybody ponder a guess? When you clock in and clock out? See, black people call it can't see to can't see, right? Sunrise to sunset. That's how hard we work. And then there are always white people who feel the dissonance and need to back up people. They go, well, do you have any empirical evidence to suggest they didn't have anything? They may have just worked an 8-hour day with breaks and lunch. How do you know? Well, we actually do know because we have forensics now, and our ancestors unearthed themselves, of all places, on Wall Street. Most people don't associate slavery with New York or the North. The truth is all 13 colonies had slavery, with estimates of 10 to 20,000 people buried in this 7-acre burial ground. It's considered the largest known site of its kind in the U.S. Blakey's analysis of human skeletal remains revealed that these men and women were literally worked to death. How do you know? They suffered from enthesopathies, a condition resulting in the muscle detaching itself from the bone as a result of people being worked beyond human capacity. That's how hard we work, you lazy people, you. Isn't it? Remember, Linnaeus said we were lazy, didn't he? He said scientifically we were lazy, and we were literally worked to death. But Thomas Jefferson couldn't have folks knowing that, so he just simply asserted, well, you know, they just require less sleep. Then he says something even more difficult and to even wrap your head around. He says we were incapable of feeling grief. Why would Thomas Jefferson need to believe such a thing? What was he doing that he needed to rest and wrap himself in that lie? He was selling mothers away from their infants, away from husbands, away from wives, brothers away from sisters. Surely they cannot feel grief. That would make them human, like me. So he simply asserted it's not true. Now I close out my book with a soliloquy from Thomas Jefferson. He says, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and that his justice cannot sleep forever." Those are his words. He knew. He knew very clearly what it would produce. The assault and the trauma to the descendants of enslaved Africans and to the unearned privilege of the whites and their progeny. So just to kind of give you an idea of how you dehumanize a person in just a flash. You barely know, again, you're talking about anyone human. This is why he had to assert that we could not feel grief. Valuable Negro woman accustomed to all kinds of housework, good plain cook, excellent dairy maid, washes and irons, has 4 children, one, a girl 13 years of age, another 7, a boy about 5, an infant 11 months old. 2 of the children will be sold with the mother, the other separately if it best suits the purchaser. I want you to imagine that being your family today. And someone coming and saying, well, you know, we could sell them as a package, but if you don't want them all, we'll just sell them separately. You can't even wrap your head around it. Again, send us your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And there's a reason why we could do this, because we can't feel it. Well, what role did religion play? We know they were there from the gate. Y'all don't know Richard. Richard was an absentee owner. He was the son of a Presbyterian minister, international trader of enslaved Africans, amassed a fortune back in the 1700s worth $68 million today. Never left home. But he owned the enslaved Africans. He owned the sugarcane plantations. He owned the ships. But he never got his hands dirty because he never left home. But this guy you do know. You know the Reverend John Newton. I can guarantee you know him. I want you to, and again, the Reverend John Newton. I had to study him because, I'm on the international faculty of the Department of Health in London, so I had to study British history and understand the impact of enslaved Africans there. And listen, look at what he said. He said, "Slaves are lesser creatures without Christian souls and thus are not destined for the next world." Now this is a minister saying this, but what you have to understand is why he said it, because he was experiencing cognitive dissonance. Now let's see why he was experiencing dissonance. When the women and girls are taken on board a ship naked, trembling, and terrified, they are often exposed to the wanton rudeness of white savages. The prey is divided upon the spot. Resistance or refusal would be utterly in vain. I sinned with a high hand. And then he discovered something that everybody sings about. Amazing grace. Now see, I read about him. It took him a long time to find that amazing grace. But until he did find the amazing grace, he had to, of course, dehumanize the young women and girls he was raping. He said, well, you know, they don't have souls anyway, because he needed to feel no dissonance for ravaging these frightened, tormented girls. So he just asserted, well, they don't have souls, so I'm okay to rape them. And then, of course, his dissonance got to him, and he finally found amazing grace. Well, let me explain to you post-traumatic slave syndrome. I don't think there's anyone in the United States that sings Amazing Grace more than black people. Am I telling the truth? This Sunday, somewhere in a black church, Sister Jones gonna sing the solo. Stay with me. Because there's one line of that I don't understand how any black person can allow move through their lips. That saved a wretch like me. He should be saying it because he's the wretch. Are you following me? But now we, black people, call ourselves the wretch when they were raping our ancestors and beating and selling them. And now we call ourselves the wretch because we don't know who we are, because we don't know this history, because it somehow escaped the textbook. Post-traumatic slave syndrome.
When I was an undergrad, I went to Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio. And I remember coming home and, having dinner with my family and grandmother and parents and my sisters at the dining room table. And so I made an announcement. I'm a Marxist. And my grandmother said the more education they get, the dumber they get. But anyway, when I'm training in psychiatry and looking for the answer to be an effective psychiatrist with black people, looking for the answer to racism. And I remember attending a Black Power Committee meeting. And as a matter of fact, I was doing a fellowship in child psychiatry at that point. And I would get a voice. And if you get a voice in here, you need to see a psychiatrist. If you get a voice in here, I think that's God talking to you. And the voice would say, and I would be writing up cases at the end of the day, and the voice would say, go to a Black Power Committee meeting. Just quietly. It wasn't frightening. So when ministers say they get a call, and I kind of know what they mean. And so this would happen over and over and over again. Again, it was subtle, very subtle, nothing to shake you up or anything, because I didn't go to meetings. And so I finally went to a Black Power Committee meeting. And after the meeting, people were sitting in somebody's apartment eating African food. And a gentleman was on the other side of the room. And I heard this man say, mind you, I'm looking for further answers to racism. And I hear this gentleman over there in the other corner saying racism is a system. And it's like my mind, I'm looking for, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And so I started talking to this person. The gentleman's name was Neely Fuller Jr. He wasn't a college professor. He was a guard at the Bureau of Engraving in the District of Columbia, where they print the money. And this man had started writing about racism in the mid-1950s when he was in the Korean War. And he said he was seated on his station was on a radar site up in the mountains in Japan. And he started thinking about racism and thinking about what was going on in this country, in this part of the world. And he said that the language of segregation and desegregation didn't make much sense on that mountaintop. And he started thinking that racism is a system. Now I want to repeat after me. Racism is a system. Now, I consider this gentleman one of the most profound thinkers of any color in the 20th century. Remember, we started the 20th century with our great sociologist, historian, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. And Dr. Du Bois told us in his book, Souls of Black Folks, in 1903, that the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line between the lighter and darker races of mankind. And then mid-century, Neely Fuller Jr. came along with his book, and I hope that everybody will get his book who doesn't have a copy. His phone number is 202-484-5461. But it is a profound statement, analysis of looking at racism as a total system structure that functions in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of maintaining the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. So being a psychiatrist, and at that point, that's the mid-1970s, late 1960s, we would sit up in my apartment, and that was when, you're at an age you can sit up and debate till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning and get up and go to work. That's not the case today. But I would listen to the discussion of Mr. Fuller. We had another colleague, Dr. Carl Hutchinson. He's deceased, Chicago physician. He was training in orthopedic surgery. And Mr. Fuller had a beautifully hand-printed, might have had 1,800 pages of beautifully handwritten notes, documentation of his ideas that he carried around in his suitcase. Dr. Carl Hutchinson said, "I will type this manuscript in between surgical cases." And so he took the handwritten manuscript and typed it, and I spent the next 17 years saying, this has got to be printed, so, got to be published. And so by 1984, it was published. But I started raising the question. Psychiatrists always, old school psychiatrists, I say new school psychiatrists, are just supposed to, oh, you're depressed? Well, let me write a prescription. You see, oh, you're anxious? Let me write a prescription and goodbye. I'll see you next time for another 15 minutes. I'm old school. I see all my patients for 1 hour. I believe that you have to talk to people and understand, and then help them understand, so that they can graduate from the psychiatrist and go forward, because they now understand reality in a different way. So I started saying, well, why? If indeed, and I say racism as a dynamic, racism as white supremacy, has been the reality that black people all over this planet have faced for the last 500 years. There's never been a moment, there's never been a minute, there's never been a day, there's never been a week where we have not been confronted with racism, white supremacy as a system. Never a half a minute. So I said, well, why would such a system be developed? And Mr. Fuller used to say to me, Francis, it's not important why, just learn what the system is. But, the psychiatrist in me, I've got to understand why. See, that's where little children are brilliant. Little 2-year-old people, little 3-year-old people, they start saying, why? Why? And older people get annoyed, shut up. But don't ever tell a child. If a child is saying, why, Mommy? Why, Granny? Why? You may not know the answer. Just tell the child, I don't know the answer, but I'll try to find out for you. And if I don't find out and you study and learn, you'll find out. But the question why is what turns on the brain computer. The child is asking about cause and effect. And if you can begin to understand cause and effect, you begin to get a handle on dealing with reality. So I raised the question, well, why this reality of racism? As I said, my grandfather died in 1909, and he's talking about the problem of color. Dr. Du Bois talked about it in 1903. Every black person that has been of significance to black people has tried to grapple with what was happening, what was causing us to be oppressed, and raising issues or raising discussion about it. So I tell people, mind you, I have the question in the back of my brain computer, why would they do it? And I was actually in my kitchen cooking, hands in dishwater, and the computer came with the answer. And what I started thinking about was things that were said within the system. Number one, the system said that we, as people of color, were minorities. And the other emphasis that was even greater than the factor, the numerical factor, was that we were supposed to be genetically inferior to people who classified themselves as white. Now I say, spend as much time in school as you can, spend as much time in the libraries as you can, spend as much time in bookstores as you can. Reading, repeat after me, reading is more important than watching TV. Say it again. Reading is more important than watching TV. See, everything is in books. Everything is in books. And I say beware of these little small things that you can hold in your hand where you think you're getting as much information as if you're holding a book. Just beware. So with all of the reading and all of the going to school that I had done, I said, wait a minute. People of color on this planet are the overwhelming majority. Black, brown, red, and yellow people are 9/10 majority on this planet. The other thing, that we are supposed to be genetically inferior, and I said, well, wait a minute. See, in my mind, I'm talking to wait a minute. Black people, people of color, are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to people who classify themselves as white. And I said, I've got it. Just like that, standing in the kitchen, cooking, hands in the dishwater. I said, this is the answer. So let me put it on the board. See if you all can see this. Let's say this is the planet Earth. Can you all see? Okay. So 9/10 of the people are black, brown, red, and yellow. 1/10 of the people have white skin. Instead of the people being genetically inferior, the people who can produce the black pigment melanin are genetically dominant. Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you haven't taken a course in genetics, just look at our president, Barack Obama. The president's mother is white. His father is black. Because the ability to produce that black pigment is dominant, and the inability is a recessive genetic trait. So black plus white could only produce black. Are you all with me? So I said, now what am I doing? Let's say that this is planet Earth and this is Europe. And this is 1492. And Columbus started European people coming out and moving, little boats coming out of Europe, beginning to circumnavigate the planet. Every place these white gentlemen landed, they found colored people. Colored people everywhere. If the people extended their hospitality to sexual relations, and the men waited around 9 months for their boats to get repaired, they realized that all of the people were not only colored, but all of the babies that came about would be colored babies, President Obama being an example. So I maintained they didn't have to have a big conference hall, big church, but they realized if everybody is colored and everybody is genetically dominant, unless we control all of these people, these men might get in boats. And start going from south to north. And maybe at that time they were even aware that the white women said their ideal mate was tall and dark. So they realized, I maintain at that point, that white could disappear. That white could disappear on this planet unless they control. And we all grow up learning. Black people learn this before they learn how to read. If you are black, what class? Get back. If you are brown, stick around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. And if you're white, you're all right. Now I can say this in London, England. And the audience knows if you're black, get back, brown, stick around, yellow, mellow. Wherever white people have been where there are colored people, if they stayed around to make a color mix, that people start learning this. But most people don't understand, you just learn. Growing up, if you're black, get back, brown, stick around, yellow, brown. This is the color code for white genetic survival. The more color you have, the greater your genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation. Are you following me? So we're taking the mystery out of all of this. But beyond that, see, all over this country, we are looking at a certain dynamic taking place. And I basically say we are on a genocide slide. Do you see that if people, certain people, are fearful of the genetic power of another group of people, then they will try consciously and or subconsciously to destroy those people. It's as though they have been labeled a genetic enemy. And so if you went to the prison, you will see more people at this color end than at this color end. Do you follow what I'm saying? Beyond that, men and women may be equal as human beings. See, the audience got quiet. What is she going to say? Do you see? But it's only men, it's only males who can impose sexual intercourse. Are you following me? See, Sally Hemings didn't rape Thomas Jefferson. You know, if Sally Hemings got a knife out of the kitchen and threatened to have sex with Thomas Jefferson and he got afraid, what would happen, gentlemen? See, now I don't know if everybody got that lesson in physiology, but men know. If I went to my purse and got a M16 rifle and said to a man, "You are going to have sex," and I frightened him, gentlemen, what would happen? See, an erection cannot be maintained in the presence of fear. That's just fundamental physiology. The Creator made it that way. So a man wouldn't be, distracted by pleasure when he needed to run because of fear. So women cannot impose sexual intercourse. They can try to entice, influence, but they cannot impose. Ultimate imposition is to get a weapon. So the focus for white genetic survival has to be on the male, and then it has to be on the males who have the greatest genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation. Are you all following me? So Neely Fuller has told us that we're dealing with a system, and the system, to maintain the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. Now, he doesn't say for the purpose of genetic survival. That's Francis Welsing's contribution. Okay, but I say this power equation is the white genetic survival power equation necessity. And the system functions in economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. Now, we are in a temple called the Shrine of the Black Madonna. Now, we can go back in history, and the paleontologists and anthropologists are telling us that black people were the parents, the first people. I'm not talking about some higher primate. I'm talking about human beings. Black people are the first people. Black people are the mothers and fathers of everybody on this planet. The first people to know about God. The first people to be mathematicians, architects, scientists, philosophers, to know about astronomy. But when the people who classify themselves as white started taking over, they knew of the critical importance in the area of religion of telling people, the whole world of colored people, that God was white. Now that was, I say, a critically important step, and sometimes I give the people who run white supremacy some grades. They can get A+. Because that was a very strategic move. Do you see, to say, well, wait a minute, it's more of them than us. So first, if we conquer them, then we can brainwash them and have them think that they are the image of God, and having the people of color praying to white day and night to love them and to save them. And, oh God, why did you make me black? I'll just tell you all a little story. When I was very young, and I'm baptized Baptist, and christened AME, that's to satisfy both sides of the family. My grandfather was chairman of the Deacon and Trustee Board at Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago for 35 years. So I'm in church, before you can see straight. But I say this was a strategic move in having, your Sunday school every Sunday from the time you can breathe. And I remember looking at the Sunday school card. We used to get Sunday school cards with a little picture of Jesus bowing down in Gethsemane, And so I remember in our pantry, a little room with a lot of shelves and food, and there would be a big box of Quaker Oats on the bottom big shelf. So I remember going in there one day and just looking at the Quaker Oats box, and I said to myself, that must be God, because he just looked like an older Jesus. I didn't discuss this with my parents. I had just concluded this on my own. Here's Jesus looking young on the Sunday school card, and here's this white man with this long white hair. And I just said, especially since you sang the grace and we thank him for this food, this oatmeal, so that had been my conclusion. Let me tell you a secret. Anybody who was taught that this white man was the Son of God, their brain computer had already jumped ahead that God had to be white. Do you understand what I'm saying? So whether you were ever questioned about it, given a lecture about it, your brain computer had jumped ahead instantaneously and made the conclusion. But I say that truth is very difficult to hide. It manifests itself, it surfaces, no matter how you try to suppress it. So I said if we even look at the name Jesus and break it down into Ebonics, then we have just us. So while we're waiting for somebody else, it's just us that have to get ourselves together. You see, but I say, if you begin to understand what I'm saying about what racism as white supremacy is, not racism and white supremacy. Neely Fuller informs us racism is white supremacy, and white supremacy is racism. And what I'm saying is that we have fought as black people dealing with this problem generation after generation after generation after generation, that it was just a question of, well, white people have to be taught to love. I remember standing in my home being a little girl, just the height of the table. My parents were reading the Chicago Defender, my grandmother was there, and they were kind of whispering about a black man having been lynched. You know, they would talk softly, and then if you were a child, you knew to listen carefully. So I said to my grandmother, well, Granny, why would they do it? And my grandmother said, well, some people just have to act ugly. But beginning to understand what racism is in terms of the demographics and the genetics on the planet, that this is what people who classify themselves as white felt they had to do for their survival. And it is not logical to expect people who designed a system consciously and or subconsciously for their survival to undo that system. Do you understand? That doesn't make sense. And this is what we have been thinking. Dr. Martin Luther King, in all of his genius and in all of his courage, talked about love. Do you see? But if all of the 9/10 people on the planet, plus the 1/10 white people, if everybody, I'll put this in a heart, if everybody was to love, and people were not paying attention to color, what would happen? The white would disappear because it is recessive. It would disappear. Now, I've talked to white people. I've talked to audiences of white people. And I say, do you want your children to be colored? See, a lot of black people say they have white friends. But that's as long as they're just laughing and talking. They don't ever ask their white friends serious questions. But I've asked white people, do you want your children to be colored? Do you want your grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-grandchildren to be colored? Do you want your great-great-great-great-grandchildren to be colored? I'm polite and they're polite. What do they say? No.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, I'm honored that you asked me to come.
That's wonderful.
Appreciate it.
That's wonderful.
Yes,
and we've seen some of the work that you've been doing over these years, and it seems to me that the first thing we should ask you is, how do you remain so consistent? Because it seems that so many people do their best work at some period, and then what they end up doing is simply trying to relive that work instead of doing more work.
Well, first I want to say something to the ladies in the audience. I want you ladies to understand that African women, and you're the genetic reproductions of our mother, were considered the most beautiful women on the planet for thousands of years by all of the civilized people of the world. The Greeks thought so much of your beauty that they named 2 star constellations after you, Andromeda and Cassiopeia. The two most beautiful star constellations that are in the heavens. They say that they have all of the beauty of the setting sun, hair which is alive, and a figure incomparable even today. So I don't want you to think that just because we went through 400 years of horror where they were saying you were ugly, that you believe that, because you're the most beautiful people. Well, you are imitated by everybody. So I want to say that before we get on to the discussion.
That's right, that's right.
That's right.
Incredible.
In answer to your question,
Yes.
and you thought that's because I'm old, I forgot the question.
His memory's better than mine.
It's an ongoing process.
Right.
One thing led to the other. And so when I did the video called The Shanghai Princess, I was really testing whether or not drama really worked, because I had found out that drama is the only thing that changes attitude, and attitude changes behavior.
Right.
So in 1990, I created a little video, almost animated, about a little Shanghai princess that was kidnapped by the Wicked Witch of the Mountain, and she was rescued by her lover, who was a medical student at Sankore University. Now, but all during the film, they saw the beautiful homes our mothers and fathers lived in West Africa. They saw the beautiful buildings, the universities. So all of this was subliminal. The impact on children was so great that I said, we've got to do a major motion picture. And that's what we are doing now. We're producing a major motion picture called Whispers of the Medallion. So it's an ongoing process. That's
right.
the reason.
That's right. So many people get sidetracked. It seems like you don't get sidetracked, though. You're focused on
Well,
work for your
there's a reason for that. And the reason is called the territorial imperative. I hate to ask this question because it's embarrassing. How many of you who are African Americans, how many of you know the African city and country from which your ancestors were born? Except my daughter.
Not one hand went up.
Not one hand went up. I asked this question of 500 whites. How many of you know the city and country? I was teaching at a university, a white university, just outside Philadelphia. Every hand went up. They knew not only the country from which they came, not only the city, but the borough from which their ancestors came. Now, how come they know and none of you know? Here's the reason. And here's the reason why I am different. The reason is that these South Carolina and North Carolina plantation owners went to Germany to find out how they could control our fathers and mothers on the plantation, because they were getting out of hand. They were burning the houses down. They were killing white folks. They were doing everything negative about being in captivity. They were never slaves. They were prisoners of war, the War of 1591. So what happened was they sought the advice of an expert in Songhai history. Now, his name was Johann Blumenbach, and he was the head of the Department of History at the University of Göttingen in Germany. How many of you know this? I know you was taught this in college and everything, all you college folks. Well, when they sought his advice, they said, do they know that they're the Songhai people? So the plantation owners who traveled over there to seek his advice said, well, of course they know that they come from the great Songhai Empire. Well, that's your problem. You can't let them know that they came from greatness, from grandeur, from beauty, from sophistication. You'll never be able to control them. So the plantation owner said, well, how can we prevent it? I mean, the mothers and the fathers would tell the children, say, you came from Timbuktu and you came from the city of Jané and that's where we were born. And then the Europeans came over and invaded us in 1591 and marched us to the seas, to the waiting ship. Said, man, you can't allow them to teach that to their children. They said, well, how are you going to stop it? Here's how you do it. Here's why you don't know where you're from. Blumenbach said, what you do, as soon as a boatload arrives, take the babies out the mama's arms. Send the parents to a distant plantation and work them to death and raise the children to believe that they came from a jungle. They won't know the difference.
That's right.
How would they know?
That's right.
Their parents are gone. Now, here's the difference between me and you. When they captured my grandmother, I'm not going through, you heard the beginning of the story. My grandfather was a lawyer and a sculptor in Benin City, Nigeria. And the English kept on coming over stealing his sculpture.
Wow.
Some of his sculpture ended up at the Art Museum in West Philadelphia, where they came to show it off because it was world-class sculpture.
So have you been able to see this sculpture?
Oh, sure.
Wow.
Yeah, we've got some in the book.
Incredible.
But anyhow, what happened was his wife hassled him and said, don't fight the English when they come over. Just let them have the sculpture. I'm pregnant. And they'll kill you. Then I'll be a widow. And they'll put me on board ship and take me over there where they're taking all the rest of those prisoners of war. But my grandfather, whose name was Mwale.
Mwale.
Mwale said, I'm fighting them. I'm not going to let them steal my sculpture anymore. And he gathered some of his fellow sculptors, and they fought the English when they came over to steal. They always stealing something. And they killed him, killed my grandfather, and put his wife, his pregnant wife, my great-great-great-grandmother on board the ship. And the ship was named Jesus, by the way. That's deep. I've been angry ever since. Well, at Jesus, I mean, not at Jesus, but and on the way over, the baby was born.
Wow.
All right, name of Diane. She named Diane. Now, it was bound for South Carolina. How many of your ancestors came from South Carolina? Raise your hand.
Oh, boy.
A whole bunch of folks. They were bound for South Carolina. But in 1808, this was 1813, in 1808, a law was passed by Congress forbidding more importations of the Songhai people. We're the Songhai people.
Right.
See, Blumenbach said, don't allow them to even learn that they
right.
came from the Songhai Empire.
Right. We're going to try to breed them here on this continent
That's
rather
right.
than continuing the
And
cultural memory.
They don't even let them learn the name Songhai. Because then they'll start investigating. Then take away their ability to read and write, pass laws against them learning to read and write. Then they can't learn anything about the Songhai Empire. They passed a law, 200 years, a law not allowing blacks to learn to read and write. Well, anyhow, in 1808, this law was passed forbidding any more importations of Songhai people. Now, nobody paid any attention to that law at all except one little group called abolitionists. Now, the abolitionists put their money together and they bought a ship. And they patrolled the seas looking for prisoner of war ships, which you all were trained to say slave ships. They weren't no slave ships, they were prisoner of war ships.
Very important
distinction. Very important distinction.
That's right.
And when we teach our children, they were never slaves.
That's
they
right.
were children, descendants of prisoners of war. Like McLean. He was a
right.
prisoner of war.
That's right.
He wasn't a slave.
That's right.
He got captured by the enemy.
That's right.
On the way, this abolitionist ship captured the ship that my great-great-grandmother was on. So instead of this baby being taken from her arms in South Carolina, the ship was towed to Trenton, New Jersey. And of course, Nzinga, who was the baby's mother, my great-great-great-grandmother, taught the baby that her father was a world-class sculptor, that her father was a lawyer, that he went to world-class universities. So I was trained from babyhood, you know, that we've got to right this wrong.
That's right. That's right.
So I was, you know, it's your job because you were spared by just an act of God, an act of the ancestors. To not let the baby being taken from Nzinga's arms, and the baby grew up, and she had a child. Her name was Mary Diane Thomas, and she was my great-grandmother, and she helped raise me.
Wow.
And so she told me the story when I was a kid, you see. So that's how I know
Wow.
where we're from.
Wow.
That's right.
Now we're fat and happy because we can go to someone else's restaurant. We can go to someone else's school. We can go to someone else's hotel. We can live in someone else's community. And we don't understand the negative aspects of that. That is a death sentence. And we don't understand what racism is. So what we are doing is committing suicide. We got 3 years ago before we go into it. 3 years ago, before you're going to see massive suicides happening. Because you don't even understand what racism is. I've gone all around the world. Even when I was with President Carter in the White House, I had to take trade missions in the third world nations, in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East. And invariably, wherever I spoke, I would ask people, do you know what racism is? I would even offer $1,000 for a person to tell me what racism is. I still got black folk today who don't even know what racism is. They talk about it. Find me one that understands what racism is. Every time I ask them, what is racism? Well, Dr. Anderson, racism is not liking somebody. It's prejudice, it's bigotry, it's hatred. No, it's not. Racism is a competitive relationship between groups of people that are competing for the ownership and control of wealth and resources and power. That's what racism is. Racism is a group phenomenon. Racism is a team sport. You cannot participate in racism if you don't play as a team. You can't correct it. You're not even in the game. Racism is like football, basketball, and baseball. You play as a team or you lose. And I got all these so-called educated blacks in America on TV, heading up civil rights organizations, getting elected to public office. Don't you understand what racism is? That's why they don't do anything. They go there and tell you, well, I'm in a public office now, I'm a mayor or governor. My thing is to make sure everybody get along. That's not affecting racism. Nobody asked you to get elected to office to make people get along. Now, racism never existed on the earth until the 1400s. Never had it. There was no such thing as racism. You had people, for instance, who had practiced various forms of discrimination. We even had slavery. But to be enslaved prior to the 1400s for only three reasons. Either you were a victim of a religious persecution, or you had some indebtedness, was enslaved, or you were a prisoner of war. Those were the only three reasons you could be enslaved until the 1400s. About 1442, when Magellan, he went around, Henry the Navigator rather, went around the coast of Africa and picked up about 16 blacks and brought them back in 1442 and gave them to the Pope as gifts. And those slaves worked around the Vatican in Italy from 1442 and about 1488. And it became a good thing to have all these blacks working free around the Vatican and in the Pope's space. No labor to be paid for. Other people wanted those advantages. So Pope Pius put out a public edict. Pope Innocent put out a public edict saying, look, if you want some slaves, go get some, but get black folk. He put out a public edict saying, if you're going to enslave anybody, enslave black people. And once that hit, all of a sudden everybody got interested in getting slaves. And that started the whole movement in 1488 and 1489. Now, something happened very important in 1495. Y'all know what happened in 1495? Allegedly, for this guy who was over here looking for drugs and some other thing. What was his name? Columbus. Y'all remember that guy? Now, he came over here and he supposedly discovered America. About 7 years after the Pope had put out his edict using blacks as slaves. Now, all of a sudden, he goes back to Europe. A race started. All these countries got into a race to develop the Western world that Columbus said he had discovered. And what was the race about? They wanted to colonize and get resources, wealth, gold, silver, and cash crops from the West, because they never knew that the Americas existed. People in Europe never knew that there was a North America, Central America, and a South America. They got into a contest to explore it and to find it and profit from it. And because at that time, prior to that, thank you, sir. Prior to that, the only, can you all hear me as well without this? Which one do you need? You need this one? Okay. So prior to that time, they had Europe all through the 1400s, but they call that, was going through what's called the Dark Ages. Europe was crime-ridden, impoverished, diseased, and they said, we can resuscitate Europe. We can strengthen this continent, and we can find a way to develop the Western world, the Americas, Latin America, Central America, North America. If we can develop that country, we can bring ourselves out of the ditch as an European continent. And so they all said, well, how are we going to do it? They said, we need a labor class. So they all rushed down and picked up the Pope's edict and started grabbing blacks off the west coast of Africa. It was picking those blacks up for an average about $25 a piece And they started setting up, so they want a 1,500% return on their money. They started selling them for $400-some a piece. And so they started shipping blacks all into this country in Latin America and Central America to put them to work as a labor class. Now, the countries that started at race, it started with Arabs. Arabs were the first ones that started enslaving black folk. I don't know if you all know that or not. Arabs were the first ones that started enslaving black folk, and Arabs have been enslaving black folk now for 1,300 years. Arabs first started enslaving blacks in 765 AD when they marched into Africa in what they call in search of the 3 G's, God, glory, and gold. And they pursued Africa until the 12th century when they overtook Timbuktu and Timbuktu fell, then they started dominating Africa. But the Arabs were the first ones. Portuguese were the second ones. Hispanics were the third ones. Then the Germans and the Danes. Then the French. Then the English. The Norwegians on down the line. Then lastly was the American Indians. Everybody's enslaved black folk. And that's what a race was. A contest started to develop the Western world. The rule was he who gets there first with the most slaves and make the most money will be the most powerful nation on earth. And the race began. Everybody was in the race to use black folk except black folk. And began shipping blacks into America. And they shipped black folk in. They justified it initially by saying that it was an economic issue. Everybody knew it was an economic issue. It stayed an economic issue all the way from the 1500s up to the 1700s. In the 1700s, when the evangelical movement moved to this country, they switched enslaving black folk to make it a religious issue. Why? Because King James then wrote, when England took over the slave trade as the biggest one and started leading the slave trades and started winning the race, King James rewrote the Bible, called the King James Version. And even had, what's his name now? What's the writer? Huh? Shakespeare and the rest of them writing. All of them rewrote the Bible. And they rewrote the Bible, then since England was the dominating country for slaves, all the slave states were mandated to use scriptures to justify enslaving the black people. So religion then became a means of codifying slavery. And then the slave owners started teaching black folk that when you hear me talk about the master and the slave in the Bible, on earth, it's the white man is the master and you're the slave. And you're mandated to do three things. 1, to accept your station in life. 2, to be humble and obedient. 3, to work hard, don't steal and don't lie. And lastly, to look for pie in the sky after death. And that stayed true up until about 1880. At that time, religion was the justification for slavery. This is important for you now. Slavery then moved from being an economic issue to a religious issue. It stayed a religious issue up until about 1859, again on the eve of the Civil War. On the eve of the Civil War, a guy named Darwin, Charles Darwin. Remember Charles Darwin? He wrote a book called The Survival of the Species, or The Survival of the Fittest. And what he's been doing, along with a lot of other pseudoscientists, was trying to connect a linkage between the lowest and the highest in life. What he was saying is that, is an amoeba that's that small, is it greater or smaller than an elephant that's big? Is a blade of grass lower in the chain than a tree? And they kept setting up these vertical systems. They call them genuses and species, going from the lowest of everything to the highest. But by that time, the white society had successfully redistributed by 1860 almost 97% of all the wealth and power into the hands of the dominant white society. The race was nearly over by 1860 or 1859 when Charles Darwin wrote his book. And they looked around and said, look, they're whites, now let's get to human beings. We worked out the relationship between between a bush and a tree and an amoeba and an elephant. But look at the black. The black has nothing. He's on the bottom, and the white master's on the top. He owns and controls everything with all the education. So obviously, the white man must be superior to the black man. And so then, all of a sudden, racism and this whole issue switched. Slavery all switched from being a religious issue. It became a biological issue. When it became a biological issue, all governments mandated that you must put a person's race on his birth certificate, driver's license, whatever it is. It became a biological issue. But the race was over then. When the race was over, they looked around. And since whites had used slavery for so long, whites own everything. Almost 100% of everything, 99.5% belonged to the dominant white society. The slave owned nothing. The white was on top, the black was in a ditch. The race was over. When the race was over and blacks had nothing and whites had everything, the race ended. And what the society did then, they took the word race, R-A-C-E. They scratched the E off the end of race and stuck a suffix called ISM. ISM is a suffix which means keep the prevailing conditions, let nothing change. And that's where racism came from. The race was over. Whites won it, they had everything. They took the E off the end of the word and stuck ISM, that's what racism is. Racism is a competitive relationship starting out to get wealth and resources and power. But what they teach you now is that racism has something to do with liking people, getting along with people. That's not racism. And when I ask people, I said, do you know what racism is? They say it's prejudice. You cannot eradicate prejudice. Everybody got a right to be prejudiced. All prejudice is you got a preconceived judgment or feeling about something based on previous experience. Right now, because of ice cream, I love burgundy cherry ice cream. So guess what? I'm prejudiced towards burgundy cherry ice cream. So now when I want some ice cream, I exercise my prejudice. I say, I'm going to get me some ice cream, some burgundy cherry ice cream, because that's what I'm prejudiced for. Now I say, where am I going to get it from? I've gotten a lot of ice cream from a lot of stores, half of one worth a quarter. That's what Baskin-Robbins has the best. So now I'm biased towards which ice cream parlor? Baskin-Robbins. I'm biased to go there to exercise my prejudice. Now when I get into Baskin-Robbins, I'll walk up and down the counter, looking at all the cherry mocha, the black chocolate rock, peppermint juicy fruit. I look at all that ice cream. And then guess what I'm doing now? Now I am discriminating. I'm discriminating against what kind of ice cream I want to satisfy my prejudice. And so I'll pick, and I go down and I say, burgundy cherry, that's it. Now, that prejudice, that bias, that discrimination has nothing in the world to do with racism. Don't let people keep tricking you by comparing prejudice and discrimination with racism. That's why all the gays jump and say, well, we're just as bad off as black folk. They're prejudiced against us. That has nothing to do with racism. You tell people, I don't care about your being prejudiced or discriminated. That doesn't bother me as a black person. I'm scared of racism. I'm scared of the fact that you're going to own and control everything. That's what you should be working on. So everything you do in this city must go after eradicating racism. Not prejudice, not bigotry, not getting along with people, not bias. You must try to redistribute some wealth and resources back in the hands of black folk as quickly as you can. That's what you need to be working on. Now, since we have never done that, and I told you slavery maldistributed almost 100% of all this nation's wealth, power, resource, privileges, businesses, and controls of all levels of government into the hands of the dominant white society, well, look at what's happening. We never corrected it. And since we never corrected racism the way it started out, that means in this country right now that the average white person in America has 3,500 times more wealth than the average black person. Y'all didn't hear that, did you? Let me give it to you again. You cannot be equal when the average white person in this society has 3,500 times more wealth than the average black person. Even if you're a middle-class black, in the $40,000 to $50,000 range. The white person has 800 to 900 times more wealth than you. If you're a black female, that means the white female has $1 for every 2 cents you have to run a household. Let me even be, since you all still don't understand this point. In America right now, where you think you're so equal in Baltimore, that you're so free, that you can spend all your time enjoying life and not worried about what's going to happen to you, in this society right now, American society, I got 2 white men. I got 2 white Americans alone that have more wealth than all 36 million black folk put together. If I take Ralph Ellison and Bill Gates, they got more wealth than all the black folk in America put together. Where is your equal opportunity? Where are you equal? What are we thinking about when it's wealth that decides what you own and control, decides what freedom and opportunities you're going to have in this society? Now, you want to know what is wealth? Wealth is not income. Don't confuse wealth with income. Income is what you get to maintain you from one week to the other. Wealth is what you got left over after you paid your bills and stacked it up. Wealth is surplus labor. That's all wealth is. Wealth means somebody has labored and you've stored it up and it has value on it. That's how whites were able to become rich and get all this wealth. That all those millions of blacks, the 5 million blacks they had enslaved, they never paid them. And when the European society sent whites to America, they said, go to America. They didn't say what the lies you hear nowadays about, well, whites came to America looking for religious freedom. No white person was that stupid. No white person was getting on a ship, sailing for 4 months around the world to find some place to pray. They didn't come here looking for no religious freedom. They came here because the governments were saying, if you go to America, we would guarantee you, we would give you free land and free labor. And you would have to be an idiot not to be rich if we give you free land and free labor. And that's where the whole franchising system started, like Burger King and McDonald's that set up a restaurant for you. They give you all equipment and the menu and all the food, and you pay them a free. And they sent the people over here from Europe to inhabit America. They gave them soldiers. They gave them some money and told them the soldiers would protect you away from the Indians. And we'll give you some slaves. And what you got to do is raise the crop products, tobacco, indigo, rice, cotton, and send it back to Europe. And we'll pay you a fee. That's what it was all about. Everybody got a chance to get rich but black folk because we never understood what racism was. We still don't understand what racism is. So we got black folk right now in America, in this city, that try to speak out on issues affecting black folk. And as soon as they start saying, we're not going to take any more of this, you're mistreating us, somebody says, well, that black guy is racist. A black person cannot be a racist. Let me say that again so y'all didn't hear me. It is impossible under present conditions in this country and any place in the world for a black people to be racist. You don't have any wealth and power. You cannot control what white folks do. You cannot enslave white folk. You cannot tell them who they can marry and who they can't marry. You can't deny them an education. You can't make them pick cotton 6 days a week, 18 hours a day for you. You cannot be a racist. You can be bigoted and biased. And I hear that all the time. He's a Dr. Anderson, but I heard that black guy out the parking lot. He called that white guy a redneck cracker. Isn't he a racist? No, he might be bigoted towards white people and poor whites, but he's not racist. That parking lot attendant can't do anything to white people. All he can do is talk. He cannot stop white folk from getting an education, from owning a business. And so what they've done now is confuse the issue of what racism is so that all black folk in America are paralyzed. They're scared to do anything. They won't speak up for themselves. They won't fight for themselves. They're scared somebody's going to call them a racist. They can't even be something that somebody's calling them. And worse than that, you've allowed all the people you're competing with to also fall underneath that cover and declare they're just as bad off as you. That's why Hispanics and Arabs and Asians and humpbacks and lesbians and midgets all get into the affirmative action program. So you got to learn how to play the games. Now let's deal with some other concepts now that you understand what racism is. Another concept is minority. Any black person in Baltimore, let somebody call him minority, you should cut him after you shoot him. That is an insult for somebody to call you, and if you to call yourself a minority, nobody's supposed to be that stuck on stupid, unless you got a stupid license. You live in a social democracy that was set up in 1789. The first law of Congress in 1789, we became a nation, said this is a white country. This is a white country, and the quota on black folk coming in is 0, unless he comes in as a slave. And the rule in a social democracy then is that the majority will win and rule, and the minority will lose and suffer. Why would you go around calling yourself a loser? I'm a loser, I'm a minority, and I'm suffering. Why would you do it? Why would you teach your children to call themselves a loser? And worse than that is in cities like Baltimore. Why would you in Baltimore be going around pushing the city to give you a minority set aside when you make up 65% of the population of the city? You are the majority. Nobody on earth is supposed to be that silly. I go to Detroit, Michigan, and I'm speaking to the legislature, and they said, well, Dr. Anderson, before you talk, we want to give you a plaque. And I said, no, before you give me a plaque, tell me what are you doing for black folk? They said, well, we got a 5% set-aside program downtown. I said, downtown where? They said, in the Office of Minority Affairs. I said, this city is 90% black. Why are you calling black folk minorities in a city where they're the majority? So, hey, somebody's elevator does not go to the second floor. Why you keep calling yourself a minority and trying to get a minority program when you're the majority? So the one white woman on the city council said, well, Dr. Anderson, well, if you, what do you want us to do? I said, in this city, the city council needs to pass a resolution saying that in this city, black people are the majority population. Once it's pointed out that you are the majority population, then it is against the law for other people coming in to rape and rob you through the government. Whites cannot come in there and take all the resources out. It's a violation of your rights. If you've had the city council in Baltimore to pass a resolution saying in this city, in Baltimore, we are a black city, that's 65% black programs. I am the majority, and you're supposed to develop all these resources in this city for me. I should not have to come to Baltimore and find absolutely no black businesses of any nature. Why am I, and I go to Detroit, Michigan again as an example. Detroit, Michigan is a 90% black city. They got 146 gas stations in Detroit, Michigan. 146 gas stations in Detroit, Michigan. Arabs own 141 in a black city. In the black city of Detroit, Michigan. Arabs own not only the gas stations, they own the grocery stores, party stores, liquor stores. The Koreans in Detroit, they own the barbecue restaurants, the nail shops, the wig shops, the hair products, distributorships. The East Indians in Detroit, they own the rest of the businesses. They own the Dunkin' and Donuts, the cheap motels, the check cashing services. Blacks own nothing in a city where they're the majority population. I got 1 million black folk in Detroit that owns nothing. Now, what's the impact of that? That's why in the 2000 census, the United States government declared Detroit to be the poorest city in the United States with the highest crime rate. And everybody's sitting back in the black leadership saying, oh, why are we so poor? You're poor because you're stuck on stupid. There is a direct relationship in this country between how many businesses you own and how poor you're going to be as a group. Those groups that have no businesses are going to be poor and imprisoned. It is not the government's responsibility to help you do anything. The government's responsibility and the police department's responsibility is to put you in jail and keep you out of the way. When you have a Katrina situation, which on one of my videos, I started talking about Katrina 7 to 8 years before it even happened. That was almost 10 years before it predicted that was going to happen to Katrina. They got me crying on the video and they wouldn't take it out. But the video telling me what's going to happen in that city because the poverty rate was so high, 82% poverty rate in New Orleans before Katrina even hit. And nobody was concerned and understand that if you don't have any businesses, you're going to be poor. The reason black people are the poorest people in the United States is because we don't own businesses. Now watch this now. In this country, in America, the group with the highest income in America today are Asians. The median family income for an Asian in America is $55,000 for median family income. Y'all follow this along, so when long after I've left you this evening, you'll never forget this as long as you live. The median family income from an Asian is the highest in the United States at the end of the group, $55,000. Underneath them are whites. The median family income from a white person is about $53,000 to $54,000. The median family income for these Hispanics that you're also worried about and getting them into the country are over blacks. They're at $32,000 and $33,000. The median family income for black people is $19,400. Now, why are black folk on the bottom in income? Here it is now. Asians got a $55,000 income, median family income over here. Here's why they got that income. 1 out of every 10 Asians are in business. Again, $55,000 income, they're at the top. 1 out of 10 are in business. Let's go down to the next level. You got whites now over here. Whites are at $53,000 to $54,000 income in that general range. They got 1 out of every 34 in business. Hispanics got 1 out of 54 in business. Black folk at the bottom with 1 out of 104. If you don't have any businesses, you're going out of existence. Why is that now? It's because all you're doing is working for a living. We're the only people that encourage our children to go off and get a good education and go get a good job. No other group of people tell their children that. No other group is that silly to tell their children, go off and get a good education and then go get yourself a good job working in a white company someplace. Everybody else tells their kids something different, and I'll explain to you with Chinese a little later. We're the only people that don't encourage our children to start businesses. If you go put your child into a job, or if you're working a job, you got to understand the purpose of a job. The purpose of a job is not to enrich you. You cannot get rich working a job. The only way you can get rich working a job is if you're good at stealing. A job is designed to maintain you. A job is designed to keep you one way from the welfare lines, unemployment, and food stamps. You work a job until you get too old and they retire you, then you got to go out and beg on the streets. You might get lucky to give you a silver watch. A business will redistribute wealth and power to you 8 times faster. If you have a business, you can also get a salary, but you can also get capital gains. You can also get depreciation. You can get appreciation. You can write you got all kind of tax loopholes. You can write off all kind of things on your against your businesses. You can do all kind of things. The system is set up where those who don't have businesses pay all the taxes. Winn-Dixie had about 500 stores one year when I was over education in the state of Florida. I looked at the record. They had about 526 stores in the United States. Winn-Dixie, like Safeway, 126 stores. And I think one year they only paid $9 in taxes. They got all kinds of loopholes, flip back, take backs, and everything else to make sure they don't pay any taxes. You work at a job, you got nothing you can write off except your interest payment on your house and your taxes on your house. That's it. The rest of your money is going to take care of the rest of this country. And we're the only people who have no businesses. Black folk are paying more than their share of taxes because we are so silly we won't start businesses. Now, let me go to another issue. If you start businesses, what must you do? How do you start those businesses? I put all that in Powernomics. Start businesses at this late game. It's too late for you just to simply go into a business. It is too late to simply go into a business randomly say, well, I'm going to start a business. I don't see any flower shops on the street, so I'm going to start a flower shop. It ain't going to cut it. Now, at this point, the door is almost closed on us in this country. If you're going to go into a business, you must go into a business where you have a competitive advantage. You must be able to tell me or somebody, the reason I'm going into this business is because I have a competitive advantage over my competitors. And I'll ask you, what are your competitive advantages? You must build your business around two things. Wherever your people dominate in population, or wherever your people dominate in spending patterns. That's how you go into business. And if you unify yourselves, you got a chance. If you don't, you're through. Now you hear people talking about, Dr. As we should go into business because we got a $700 billion annual disposable income. You're right. They said we're the ninth richest nation on earth. You're right. Black people in America's annual disposable income is higher than Sweden, Pakistan, India, North Korea, South Korea, Vietnam, and all the African countries put together. But we are the poorest people in the country because we do not practice group economics. Everybody on earth practices group economics but us. Again, Powernomics talks about all this stuff. So did black labor, white wealth. Everybody practices group economics but us. Now, what is group economics? Group economics means you must learn how to pool your resources in a vertical way and buy from your own people, up and down a chain. Just that simple. It says nothing, you don't have to love all black folk, you don't have to be kissing on them and hugging on them, but you should support them and buy from them. We won't do it. Now, in group economics, the rule is this. Your money is supposed to bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves your hands. It's supposed to bounce 8 to 12 times before it leaves your hands or leaves your race. That means that if you got $1 in your pocket right now, that dollar should go to another black person and another black person, 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 till it passes through 8 to 12 times before it leaves and go to a non-black hand. In America, Hispanic money bounces 6 to 7 times. Hispanics in America right now that you're all competing with, they spend their money to their own people 6 to 7 times before it leaves a Hispanic hand. White money bounces 8 to 12 times. Arab and Asian money bounces 13 to 14 times. Jewish money bounces 18 times. Black money doesn't bounce once. As soon as a black person gets paid, he'll run over you trying to get to a non-black business to spend it. As soon as he gets, right now, if you're out on the street, every black dollar right now in Baltimore is going into a non-black hand right now. They're committing suicide. Every time you fail to spend your money with your own people, not only have you failed to practice group economics, but you flush $11 down the toilet. When you leave here right now and you go out there and you stop at a gas station, and you buy a dollar's worth of gasoline, which is about a spoonful about like that. If you buy a dollar's worth of gasoline, you just threw $11 down the toilet. It didn't go to a black hand. Anytime you put your money in another group's hands, you are aiding them and wiping you out. Now, if you're going to practice group economics in this city, what do? You must first start by building a community. You all right now in Baltimore are ideally set to have been power bases economically in this city. It's inexcusable for you all, even 20 years ago, not to have controlled this city economically. Even before they built Harbor Place there. Every business in Harbor Square right now should have been black owned. You all are the poor. Those places couldn't exist without you all. You're subsidizing them. While you're subsidizing everybody else's businesses, they are boycotting the few businesses that you got. If I find a black business in the city right now, I guarantee you that everybody is boycotting it. You will never, ever see, and if you do, let me know about it. You will not see a white person get in his car, for instance, on a Saturday morning, like this morning, drive into a black Baltimore area, get out of his car, go into a black-owned store, buy a black product produced by a black person. If you all see that, take a picture of it. But I guarantee you, every black in this auditorium and this city, every chance he gets, he's going to get in his car and drive to a white suburbs or to a white mall, to a white store. And every time he does that, he is transporting his money out of his race and making it possible for his competitors to send their kids to college, to pay their mortgage, and to feed their children. We are poor because we keep giving our money away. And we can't make it. Time is just about run out on us. And that's why I was in Detroit, Michigan, trying to build this whole thing that sometimes the white newspaper called it African Town, a version of it. And I was building a 22-acre site up there. And I was putting in 26 factories, black-owned factories, and about 42 black-owned businesses, retail businesses. Because black folk don't have an industrial base, so they can start producing and manufacturing. And some silly blacks in government and the whites came out against it and called me all kinds of dirty names. Even had nerve to call me a racist. Because I came in to help black folk, they called me a racist. One of them said, well, Dr. The white newspaper said, your book should be on the shelf with Mein Kampf, with Hitler's books. I said, why? Well, because you only talking about black folk, focusing on black folk. You're biased, you want to help the rest of the people. I said, in this city of Detroit, Michigan, y'all listen to this. In the city of Detroit, that's 90% black. They got a Arab town, Mexican town, hockey town, court town, pole town, Chinatown, Greek town. I said, I'm gonna build a black town. Doctor, that's racist. And so just about 2 weeks ago, I just said, well, you all keep it, I'm gone. I said, black leadership, and that's silly, to sit there and from the mayor's office down and let white folks tell you that you can't focus on the needs of your own people. As a matter of fact, one black woman on the city council came out against me and went on every talk show in America, trying to denounce me. And I had radio stations coming in, the BBC Broadcasting Company from England came over, a Canadian Broadcasting Company, ABC, NBC, Wall Street Journal, all want to interview me. He said, Doctor, that's the kind of stuff you're talking about. Nobody else talks about that. We thought y'all were happy with integration. You're talking about black folks should do what? I said, black folks need to go back and rebuild their own communities. We are the only people in this country that do not have communities. It is impossible, I'm going to tell you a black businessman now, it is impossible in this city for you all to get into wealth and power unless you have communities. There is not one black community in America. Not one in the entire United States. All we got in America are neighborhoods, which you all cut short and call it the hood. We don't have any black communities. A neighborhood is where you eat and sleep. A community is where you store your wealth, your culture, your history, your power, your income, your businesses. To have a community, you must have three elements to have a community. One, you must have a wholly independent economic structure that can produce taxes, products, services, and goods, and business opportunities for your own people. That's the first thing. Secondly, you must have a code of conduct that would teach you to buy from, support from, and love and care about your own people. And thirdly, you must have some people in elected office that'll speak for you inside and outside. We don't have any blacks any place in the United States that would speak up for black folk. Every organization in the country that I know of, and every black politician I know of, they're into everything but blackness. They talk about anything but blackness. If I were to ask him, if I go to the NAACP and say, Mr. NAACP, who do you all represent? There's a Dr. Anderson, we represent minorities and people of color. I said, okay, NAACP, you're minorities and people in color. Let me go over here. Urban League, who do you all represent? We represent diversity and multicultural and poor people. And I said, okay, let's go over here to this one. I said, Jesse, who do you represent? He said, I represent the rainbow. And I keep saying, who represents black people? Nobody. Nobody wants to represent black folk. And not on that, then here comes all your elected officials. And when they speak up with issues, they go out to the marketplace, they don't even fight for black people. I don't see any black elected officials fighting to get economic started for black folk in this country. Name me a black person. You had one person that used to push that. And I used to love him for it. Back when I was over education in the state of Florida, Perrin Mitchell was from this city. Perrin Mitchell understood the importance of black folk having businesses and having an economy. And back in the civil rights days, they made that point and said, we got to have businesses. We don't want just integration and civil rights. We want some businesses. And the white liberals and the Jews told them, if you all start talking about businesses, we're going to walk away from you and leave you. And that's where that gap started between blacks and Jews. Perrin Mitchell will tell you about, well, Perrin is dead now, isn't he? He's not dead. Perrin Mitchell will tell you about that. You got to start businesses. Now, start the businesses that I told you. Start businesses where you have a competitive advantage. Now, you ask me, what are your competitive advantages? For instance, you are the only people that got certain kind of hair, for instance. You got a quality of hair that nobody else on earth has. It's your hair. You all are the one that got it. You are the consumers. You are the users of it. That being true, why is it that Koreans control 84% of the dollars in your hair? How is it that Koreans control 84 cents of every dollar that black folks spend on their own hair, and nails and wigs and everything? Huh? Because we're not controlling it. That industry should belong to black folk. It should go vertical. You should control everything from the bottom, from producing the hair products, all the way to the top to the retail shops. The same thing in leather. Black folk right now consume more leather and wear more leather than any other group. There's two kinds of leather being produced right now in the United States. Fine leather by the Italians, some of the other lesser quality leather by the Asians. And blacks are wearing the leather. We wear more leather than anyone else, but we're buying it from other people that are producing it. Black folk drink and spend 43 cents out of every dollar spent on Scotch liquor. 42 cents out of every theater ticket comes out of a black pocket. You don't have any movie studios, you don't own any distribution companies, but you're supporting the movie industry. You're supporting the Scotch liquor industry. Because we're not practicing group economics. And we're losing. Start businesses and start keeping your money in your own communities. Go around this city and find you a district. Find a district where you got good traffic flow. And pull all the blacks, like fill this auditorium up with black people. And say, we're gonna start some businesses. And we're gonna buy from our own people. Everybody else is boycotting us. You start boycotting other people. And spending your money with your own people. You got to wear your gas stations, your bakeries, your automobile dealerships, your theaters. Start your own and go there. And when you go to a black person, you buy from a black person, what you do is called cost-benefit analysis. You make sure that every penny you spent, you get the biggest bang for the buck. If you don't spend your money with your own people, you lost it. Now, if you spend money with a black person, you tell the black person, I'm going to buy from you if you're running a bakery. If your bread is hard today and it's not the best bread, I'm still going to buy from you. I'm going to buy from you because of cost-benefit analysis. If I don't buy your hard bread today, even though you're selling it to me for 50 cents, and I can go out to a white store and get the same and get softer bread for 40 cents, where is the benefit? Who loses? You lose. What you do is you make him say, look, I'm going to buy your bread, and I'm going to keep buying your bread, but I'm giving you a short time to get me a better quality bread and get me a better service in here. And I want you to clean up this place, clean up the business, and more importantly, to change your negative, nasty attitude when I come in here. When you go into a black store, you tell him, you know, change your attitude. Rush to the store, you see a customer, and hug and kiss on him and walks in the door. And say, would you love to sit down? I'll wipe the seat off for you, fan you if you want to. Just enjoy yourself in my store. It reminds me when I was way back many years ago, when I was dating in Detroit, Michigan. I was living at that time. I used to go by the Howard Johnson store to get my ice cream, y'all. I used to go by the Howard Johnson to get some ice cream, and I used to get banana splits in. I'll go in on a regular basis. But Howard, the neighborhood had changed over, and all the waitresses were whites. And it dawned on me one day. I said, boy, I come to this Howard Johnson, and all the waitresses are whites. I said, I gotta make it. I said, this is not right. So when the waitress would wait on me and get me my ice cream, and one day I said, look, would you give me one of those suggestion cards in the back there? She said, yes. She looked in the bar and gave me a suggestion card. I wrote on the suggestion card, dear manager, it might come as a surprise to you, but this is a growing black neighborhood. It would be very positive for you and a compliment to the city in this neighborhood if you were to hire some blacks in this Howard Johnson. I would appreciate it as a customer and a sincere customer and put it back in the box. I came out there about a month later. This time, and I walked into the Howard Johnson. I walked up to the place where it have carryouts. I stood at the counter like this, waiting, and I looked, and there's a sister down there. They'd hired a sister. And she's laying on the counter like this, reading the newspaper. I stood there for at least 15 minutes while she's reading the newspaper. Then finally, without even looking up, she turned her head to me like this and said, do you want something? I said, yes, ma'am. Would you give me another one of those suggestion cards over there out of that box? I got that suggestion as dear manager. I'm the same guy that wrote that comment letter. I said, fire her as fast as you can and go back to what you had before. Make our people do right by their own people. Make them respect you and appreciate you. And if he comes into you and gives you a bad job, don't say I'm going to hate black folk, I ain't going to ever buy from black folk anymore. Say, no, you're going to come back here and do this job right. I got blacks always saying, well, Dr. Anderson, I don't want to go to no black store because I had a black guy do this for me 10 years ago. He did a bad job. I don't want to deal with black folk anymore. White folks been doing things bad to you for 500 and 600 years. You're still dealing with them. But anyhow, we're going to have to start businesses. And when you get ready for that, the Harvest Institute will help you. And we are anxious to help black folks start business all over the United States. We've got special programs for it. And you can do it. And again, as a last example, let me compare Detroit again. Let me take Harlem. In Harlem, they have an Asian town, Chinatown there. Chinatown has about 100, if I remember, about 180 something Asians in Chinatown in Harlem. In Detroit, Michigan, Detroit has 1 million black folk. Now, watch this now. When I go into Asian town, in Chinatown, in Harlem, I looked around. Harlem has 34 banks, Asian banks, with only 187,000 Asians. I go to Detroit, they got 1 million blacks, they got 2 banks. I go look at Harlem, Chinatown again. Harlem had something like about, I think, 400, I think, manufacturing, restaurants. Here I go to Detroit, they had something like 15 in a city with 1 million blacks. I looked at the number of manufacturers they had, about 180 something manufacturing outlets. Detroit had something like about 10 of those. Now I said, now how is it that these Asians can have all these businesses? And the competitive advantage is this. With all those restaurants, 400 restaurants, watch this. What do they have in 400 restaurants that they primarily always serve in almost every restaurant? Some noodles. They have some kind of noodles. So what the Asians did, they had, since they eaten all those noodles, what kind of manufacturing companies do they set up? Noodle companies. Now, if they're eating noodles, what did they put on noodles? Huh? No, they had some kind of, what's that stuff they put on at the dark stuff, what is it called? Huh? Soy sauce. So also they had all these Asian soy sauce companies that manufacture soy sauce to go on it. Then, and when they finish eating in a Chinese restaurant, what do they give you? A fortune cookie. I found all these little companies that manufactured fortune cookies. And so then in the Wall Street Journal, then they put in there that they said they would not hire any blacks in any Chinese restaurant under any circumstance. They said because we set up our businesses to do what? To produce jobs and wealth for our people. We will not hire any blacks. You will not see any blacks in the Chinese restaurants or Benihana restaurants. They're not going to hire you. They don't want you in their restaurants working. No, and yet everybody works for their own people except us. That's why our unemployment rate right now in America is 35%. For Asians and Arabs, the unemployment rate is 0. Y'all understand that? It's 0 for Asians and Arabs. For whites, it's 4.5. For Hispanics, it's 4.6. You all should be very concerned about this immigration bill. Why is this country so concerned about finding jobs for 12 to 20 million illegal immigrants who have a 4-point-something or 0 unemployment rate, and the black unemployment rate in America is 35%. In Baltimore, your unemployment rate is 48%. In Detroit, your unemployment rate is 48%. In Pittsburgh, the black unemployment rate is 49%. In New York, your unemployment rate is 51%. For black youth, it's 87%. Why aren't you all busting down on your black congressmen in this city saying, quit worrying about illegal immigrants' unemployment and do something about this black unemployment? And the best way to do something about black unemployment is this, in closing now, make black folk job producers and not job seekers. I'll give it to you again. Nobody is going to create jobs for black folk. You must create your own jobs. You create your own jobs by creating your own businesses. You create your own businesses by buying from your own people. That's how simple it is. And that's why you come across America. Everybody understands the importance of building these communities so you can produce products, services, and goods. That's why you come in, when an Asian leaves the Far East, he says, I'm going to America. When I get to America, the first thing I'm going to do is find me some people that look like me, walk like me, and talk like me, so I can build me a Chinatown, a Japantown, a little Saigon, a little Cambodia, a little Vietnam, a little Korea. When the Hispanics come across the border, they say, I'm going down to build me a Mexican town, or a little Havana, a little Hialeah. You go across America and you can find Japantowns, Chinatowns, Cork towns, Pole towns, Greek towns, little Italys, French towns, but you'll never find a black town. Because we won't come together and unite. And as a result, in 3 years we're going to perish. These immigrants are going to bury us alive when this law is passed. They're going to bring in 12 to 20 million illegals floating around here right now. The illegals have already surpassed you. They caught us. So when slavery was going on in 1840s, you did not have one single Hispanic in the United States, or nor one Arab, nor one Asian, but you had 4.5 million blacks. In 1900, you only had 100,000 Hispanics in the United States. You had 11 million black folk. They got the same identical birth rate, and Hispanics have now caught you and passed you. They're not coming in this country to get along with you. They're coming here to surpass you and supplant you. Their intent is to bury you. All these people you all are calling minorities now, up until 1970, all the Hispanics, Asians, and Arabs that you all call people of color, they were married to, went to school with, lived with, and passed as whites. On a driver's license now of a Hispanic, he's a white person speaking Spanish. It's on there, I am white, on his immigration papers, and on his driver's license. They're coming here to compete with you. And when that 12 to 20 million pass, and you all better raise hell about this fast before it passes, and they're debating it right now in Congress. When they debate that and they legalize 12 to 20 million, their population would jump from 44 million all the way up to almost nearly 60 million. You're now still stuck at somewhere between 39. That means they've already doubled your population. And in that immigration bill, immigrants can now bring in their parents, their spouses, and their children. And the projections are from the think tanks we're working with, that means another 30 to 35 million would come in here. That means Hispanics will go up to almost 90 million while you're all still stuck in the 30 million. Now, common sense would tell you this. When Hispanics outnumber you 3 to 1, whites have outnumbered you 8 to 1 for all these years. If you didn't, and now Hispanics have kicked you out. We were the number 2 population for 400 years. We've got kicked out of being number 2 by the Hispanics. We're going down to number 3. When these Asian and Arabs come in here, they're going to kick you out of number 3. You're going down to number 4. If you got nothing after 400 or 500 years in this country of being number 2, use your creative imagination to figure out what you're going to get when you become number 4. It's coming. In 3 years, you're going to be 4th-class citizens. And the projections are that by the year 2015, that almost half the people living in America, Caribbean, Brazil, and Africa are going to die. That means you can go in those countries and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You 5, you're dead. It's going to happen. Either as a direct result of man-made disasters or natural disasters. Black folk are ill-prepared to take care of themselves in this country. You don't have any hospitals, you don't produce any food, any water, any medicine, anything. And when these diseases come in this country, and they're coming, all these flu and diseases, and you see in the food belt, and when you get these diseases into your neighborhood, they're going to shut you off and you can't get out. You have no medicine and no way of taking care of yourself. We don't control in the water. Started demanding that your elected officials come into the black community and started setting up some prophylactic measures for taking care of black folk, starting businesses so you can produce stuff and organize yourselves.
All my life, I prayed to be like Samson. just a little boy, saying, I want to be strong enough to go out and fight for black folk, to lift them up, to be a warrior for them. And I was disappointed I never got the strength to do it, never got the money to do it. And I became disappointed and discouraged. And my wife said that the problem is that God did not mean for you to save all black folk. Maybe he wanted you to be like Noah instead of like Samson. Maybe you were supposed to be Noah and not Samson. Maybe you were supposed to go across the land and warn black folk that a storm was coming. And there's going to be a flood. There's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and most were going to drown. Maybe that's what God wanted you to do. He didn't need you to save all black folk. He wants you to carry a message to them and say, prepare yourselves for the flood that's coming, the dangers that are coming. And for those who will listen, prepare yourself by building an ark. Do those kind of things and use strategies to save and rescue yourself and your people. And so I finally reconciled myself to the fact that I'm not Samson. I'm not going to be able to help save black folk. It's like one of the last major discourses I might even give in this respect from now on. That God strictly was put here to be like Noah, to warn you what was coming and what was going to happen to black folk. And so knowing like Noah, who made a prediction about the coming storms, I made predictions going back all the way through my life. Even back in the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s, when this whole social movement started about social integration. I screamed then that you're on the wrong track. You're on the wrong track. Just like the man who thought he was going to move the stone. You're on the wrong track. Social integration is not your problem. It's economic integration that's your problem. That's how I met my wife. And at that time, my wife was downtown in Detroit, Michigan, the foot of Woodland and Jefferson. And she was out there in a march with Martin Luther King, and they were getting ready to march down Woodland Avenue. And I go up to them and I said, what are you all marching for? They said, we're marching now because whites won't let us move into the suburbs. I said, but now you're 51% of the population of the city of Detroit. The city is yours. You've got all the means and resources in your hands to become an economic competitive power. Why do you want to go to the suburbs? Because we need to go out there wherever they go, we need to be able to go. And I took my wife, I wasn't married to her then. And I went over to her and pulled out the crowd. She had one of these signs. I took the sign and threw it in the alley. And she said over here, she'll tell you. And I took her home. I said, that's not the issue. The issue is not social integration, it's economic integration. But again, nobody listened. The black leadership didn't listen then. The black civil rights leaders didn't listen then. They continued to pursue a trail of social integration. And social integration meant that I am willing to give up everything I got, just sit in somebody else's restaurant, to go to somebody else's school, to live in somebody else's community, to work for somebody else's business, to be next to them. I'll give up everything I got. And I said, you're wrong. Because if you go into social integration, you're going to kill yourselves. You're going to become a deprived, poverty-stricken people if you do it. Because you see, social integration is going to strip you. It's going to strip you of your businesses. It's going to strip you of your communities. It's going to strip you of your schools. It's going to strip you of your music. It's going to strip you of your sports teams, your basketball teams, and football teams. It's going to strip you of your culture, your heritage. It's going to strip you of your uniqueness as slaves and Jim Crow segregation statuses that you had, where you can demand reparations and demand justification. You're going to strip yourself of it. And more importantly, you're going to strip yourself of your own black leadership. But again, they didn't listen. And they preferred to integrate. And see, my family had the luxury of being one of about 4 or 5 black families that owned a bus company down in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I say a bus company, I'm not talking about 1 or 2 buses. We had up somewhere between 400 and 500 buses We didn't just service the black neighborhoods, we serviced the black neighborhoods and the white neighborhoods. And in our bus company, the administration was all black. The drivers were all black. The mechanics were all blacks. We had the charter for the city. When the social integration came down in Montgomery, Alabama, they wanted to integrate the buses down there. And because they wanted to sit on the front of the white buses. And when that movement came up to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the blacks in Winston-Salem said, we want to sit on the front of some white buses. And we said, we don't have any white buses for you all to sit on. And they said, well, why don't you all get some so we can sit on them? So the Safe Bus Company, the black bus company, had to go out of business. And we were replaced by the Duke Power Company. That's what Duke named after Duke University. They came in and took the charter, bus charter, and provided buses so that they were all white drivers, all white mechanics, and all white administration, so black folk could sit on the front of it. In Winston-Salem, along the same line of social integration, we had two black cab companies. The Campbell City Cab Company was black, all black, and the Harris Cab Company was all black. Whites, it was equality because whites had two cab companies. They had the Bluebird and the Yellow Cabs. We all had our own cabs companies. They had to go out of business. We had two black theater chains all over America. The Lincoln and Lafayette Theater in every major city. Every major city had a Lincoln and Lafayette Theater. We had three black movie producing studios. Norman Productions in Jacksonville, Florida, Bishaw in Chicago, and Hollywood Productions that made black movies. We had our own movie distribution companies. Guess what? They had to go out of business because our people want to sit in the white theaters. And I can go on, but I don't want to molest the point and molest your intelligence. Because we had to give up everything, strip ourselves. And today, they're now going to close down black history teaching in colleges. You can't teach black studies anymore. Blackness now has been wiped out across the country. Nobody wants to be black. They're not going to accept any black because we are now an obsolete labor class that has been abandoned and betrayed by our own leadership. You have no black elected officials or black appointed officials, except a few I've named and a few others that are willing to stand up. No black institutions want to stand up. But no black civil rights bodies want to stand up and say, we listened to what Anderson said, predictions made, and now we're going to stand up and represent our own people first. They're not going to do it. The same thing happened, for instance, in other areas, in other areas, where all of a sudden I said, if you in fact go into social integration, whites are going to outsmart you. They're going to take all the language and terms and concepts of the civil rights movement and corrupt them so they can now use them against you to maintain the status quo to make sure nothing changes with you all. I'm going to say that again in case you missed it. They said we're going to take and corrupt all the terms that you've used in the civil rights movement and use it against you. The first one, as an example, was race, the concept of race. Race was an issue that pertained to blacks and whites. That was the issue, blacks and whites. And all of a sudden nowadays, every day on TV today, you hear everybody talking about racial profiling. About Hispanics. Hispanics are not a race. Arabs are not a race. Hispanics are an ethnic group. They are a language group. And the Hispanics every day go on TV saying it's racial profiling for us to stop, for you to stop us from breaking into your country. No black leadership stands saying, no, you're not a race. And every time you find when they interview some Arabs that are getting on planes, and they interview about because of their looks and the garments they're wearing, and they say that's racial profiling. That's not racial profiling. Arabs are a religious group, an ethnic group, and a language group. They're not a race. And on whether they're Hispanics or Arabs, on their driver's license, immigration paper, they're classified as whites. And the black leadership sits there and lets that go on. And every time they agree that any and everybody's a race, they minimize your existence. They marginalize you out of existence when you're disappearing. And they get away with it. No blacks ever say, oh, first of all, you're a language group. And as far as profiling is concerned, you are supposed to be profiled. If you break into this country, you're supposed to be profiled. And the common sense will say, yeah, right now, if I came out here to California and broke into either one of you all's houses tonight, broke into your house, went in and demanded I had rights to go into your refrigerators and go into your banking account, your checking account. And demand I got special rights now that I broke into you. Anybody would say, how in the world can you break into my house and demand rights to go to my refrigerator and my saving account when you're illegal? They say, well, what you need now, you need immigration reform. No, I don't need immigration reform. I need immigration enforcement. And they get away with it. And instead of your leadership champion going down and saying, hold a second. First of all, I'm not supporting any immigrants coming to this country, period. But I will tolerate them going through the immigration process that's legal. Because throughout the history of this nation, every so-called black leader up until the civil rights movement was against immigration. You know why? Because everybody was coming to this country over black folk. Immigration has never been for black folk.